What is up, River family? It is Wednesday, which means it's our Wednesday Bible study. Here's why we do this. We want to grow together right where we are. So we hope that this encourages you. We hope it inspires you. So let's dive into His Word. What is up, everybody? It's Wednesday morning. You know what that means. It is our Wednesday morning Bible study. Here's the reason why we do this. Every Wednesday, we want to grow together right where we are. So it doesn't matter if you're watching on Facebook, if you're on YouTube, something exciting. If you miss it in the morning, it will. Now we're going to try to podcast, take this and put it on a podcast. So if you listen to this on the podcast at a later time, congratulations, you got to hear the first podcast Bible study. But we do this so that we can grow together just right where we are. So we've been going through the book of Mark. We started this a while back, and we are currently in Mark chapter 5. So to look at where we're going to be today, we kind of need to reflect on what we talked about last week, right? Last week we talked about the woman with the issue of blood. We're in Mark chapter 5, right? It's really this large portion of text that some people call the miracle inside of the miracle. So this man named Jairus, he comes up to Jesus after he casts out this demon named Legion. He says, "Hey, Jesus, I need you to come and heal my daughter. She's ill. She's very sick." And Jesus is up for that. Now, what's interesting about Jairus is a synagogue leader, right? He's a religious leader. We know from some of the texts that we've read, the religious leaders were not big Jesus fans. You know what I mean? So imagine the desperation that this synagogue, that this religious leader had to have for him to come to Jesus. Now, on Jesus' way to Jairus' daughter, there's this woman that he comes across, or actually she sees that he's passing through, right? She's been bleeding for 12 years. She's exhausted all of her financial resources, and she has this thought: if I could just touch the hem of his jacket, if I could just touch him, then I would be healed. She risked everything, right? She wasn't supposed to be in the crowd because she was ceremonially unclean, right? And she goes in. Jesus is being bumped around by all kinds of people, but when this woman of faith touches him, he feels the power, leaves. And this woman entering the story was nameless, leaves with a name, and Jesus calls her daughter. So now we're going to pick up in verse 35, right? Remember, they're still on the way to Jairus' daughter, and this is what he said: while he was still speaking, people came from the synagogue's leader. So Jesus is talking to this lady, and the people from the synagogue leader's house show up, and this is what they said. They said, "Your daughter is dead. Why bother the teacher anymore?" Right? When Jesus overheard what was said, he told the synagogue leader, he told Jairus, "Don't be afraid, only believe." He did not let anyone accompany him except for Peter, James, and John, James's brother. Now, these are Jesus's big three, right? Jesus did everything with Peter, James, and John. They came to the leader's house. They saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing. He went in, said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping?" And they said, Jesus said, "The child is not dead, but asleep." They laughed at him. Y'all hear that? They laughed at Jesus. They laughed at the King of Kings, right? They laughed at him, but he put them all outside. He took the child's father, mother, and those who were with them, that would be Peter, James, and John, entered the place where the child was. Then he took the child by the hand. He said, "Talitha cum," which is translated, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." Immediately the girl got up and began to walk. She was 12 years old. At this, they were utterly astounded. Then he gave them strict orders that no one should know about this, and told them to give her something to eat. Right, that's the end of chapter 5. Now, this is really interesting. You know, we did this recap, and while Jesus is speaking to this lady, while he's giving her a name, remember she was just a struggling woman. Now she's named daughter. In the middle of this, people from the synagogue leader's house show up and they say, "Listen, your daughter's dead." Can you imagine what is going through this guy's mind right now, right? If it was me, I would be like, "Jesus, if you wouldn't have stopped, right? If you wouldn't have taken the time to address this woman who lived on the outskirts, who shouldn't have actually been near you, then my daughter would still be alive. If you would have just taken priority over my circumstance instead of hers, then my daughter would be alive." What's really interesting is Jesus can solve all situations. Jesus is the solution. We need to hear that, right? There's a phrase, it's not that Jesus just changes everything. Jesus is everything. And we need to understand that. And Jairus doesn't get this. All he can feel is the emotional connection with the fact that they said, hey, your daughter is dead. You don't need this guy anymore. And Jesus, it's like he has the perfect words to say. He says, listen, don't be afraid. I just need you to believe. I just need you to believe. And so they finish this path. They walk all the way to Jairus' house. And there they would have what was called professional mourners. The weeping and mourners, what they would do is they were hired and they would come and grieve. Right? They would come and they would cry. They would come and wail. They get there and they're like, man, she's dead. And Jesus says, no, she's asleep. And this is the part that I love about the entire story is they laugh at him, but Jesus kicks them all out. Right? He asked them to leave. The only people that would be in that room with him was his inner circle, which would be Peter, James, and John, and then the mother and the father. Right? Why the mother and the father? Because I believe that they actually believed that Jesus might be able to do this. So what's really interesting is up till now, Jesus hasn't resurrected anybody. Right? Jesus has healed people. Jesus has cast out demons. Jesus has taught with authority. Right? He's even healed people that he didn't even know he healed until he realized the power had left him, right? The woman with the issue of blood. But resurrection hasn't happened yet, right? Makes me think of when Lazarus dies, which is a later story. And Jesus says, hey, I am the resurrection. I am the life. I heard a pastor, it was Judah Smith, say this one time, as he said, Jesus didn't experience resurrection. Jesus is resurrection. That is his name. He's the one that takes things, position, people, all of these circumstances from dead places to life. And here's the question that I think we should all ask. Why would he kick them out? Right? Why would Jesus not just do it in front of everybody? Because I think there are certain circumstances in our life where sometimes people's unbelief would get in the way. You know, he kicked them out because they laughed at him. They didn't think that he could do it. Right? To them, he's just some kind of prophet. He's just some kind of teacher that God's been with, who's been able to heal. But as far as bringing somebody back from the dead, that's unheard of. Only God can do that, right? So he asked them to leave. And I think a very practical thing for us is there are some things that God's going to call you to in your life that the people around you aren't ready to walk with you for or through. You know what I mean? I think about Jesus and the Samaritan woman. Right? If you remember that story, Jesus and his disciples, they had to go through Samaria, is how the Bible says it. But Jesus will send his disciples to go and get food while he addresses this woman. Why would he do that? Because one, she wasn't supposed to be in his presence. She was not allowed to approach a rabbi. And two, the Jews did not associate with the Samaritans. So if the disciples would have been there at that time, they would have gotten in the way of the ministry that Jesus was trying to do. Same situation here. Right? Jesus is going to resurrect this little girl. Right? That's what he does in the story. But he kicks everybody out because sometimes the people around us aren't ready to walk through the things that God is calling us to. So sometimes I think we need to ask that question. What is God calling me to in this season? And do I have the right people around me? Or do I need to downgrade? Right? Remember, Jesus had 12 disciples. He only took 3 of them. Right? I heard a lady say fight for favorites one time because Jesus did, right? Jesus did. He ministered to crowds, but he did life with a small group. In that small group, he had a smaller group. He had Peter, James, and John, and even in that small group, he had an individual. He had the one that was closest to him, John, the beloved, right? The story continues. Jesus and the mother and the father and Peter, James, and John, they walk into the room, and he touches this little girl's hand. He says, Talitha cum, which is little girl, stand up, and she does. Right? Little girl stand up, and she does, and he tells him not to say anything, which is a common thing because it's not his time yet. But I actually want to do a little bit of comparison in the story because this is a miracle on the way to the miracle. Did you realize that this girl was 12 years old? Right? The woman with the issue of blood had issues for how many years? 12, right? Well, when I think about this story, you know, there's so many different things. Like, you have a synagogue leader who's got a name at the beginning of the story, and then you have a woman with an issue of blood who doesn't have a name, but will have one at the end. My favorite part is this: Jesus. Usually, if a clean person touched an unclean person, what would happen There's a truck behind me. I know, I just heard it, right? So when a clean person touched an unclean person, what would happen is that clean person would then be ceremonially unclean, right? But Jesus is the only person that can touch an unclean person and make the unclean clean and not be defiled himself. Jesus is also the only person that can touch dead things and bring them back to life, right? I actually want to use this moment to talk about this and say, man, listen, if you have dead things in your life, it's time to bring them to Jesus. And people may not understand what's going on, and that's okay, because sometimes they don't need to be in the room, right? That's why we named the podcast or the live stream today, hey, could you please leave? Because that's what Jesus did, is he kicked them out. So, hey, I just want to encourage you right where you are. Man, remember, Jesus is the one that touches unclean things and makes them clean. Jesus is the one that touches dead things. He brings them back to life. But also, there are some seasons in your life where the thing that God is calling you to, not everybody that you're surrounded with is ready to walk into with you. You know what I mean? So check those things. But hey, that's our Bible study this week. Next week, we will pick up in chapter 6. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, our vision and our goal for this is to grow together right where we are. We hope you have a great week. Well, hey, that is our Wednesday Bible study. We just want to thank you so much again for joining us. And if you want to join us every week, if you'll click subscribe, this podcast will pop up right there for you. Again, we want to do this to grow together right where we are.